Particle systems are used for things like effects. Typically, these particle systems are used for things that can't be hand-keyed or animated. And so you'll typically see these particle systems used with fire or smoke, fog, rain, even things like light streaks or sparks whenever someone is doing battle, smoke or dust, whatever thing that you can think of that needs some sort of dynamic behavior but is not necessarily needed to use physics. With this, let's talk about how to create a particle system. It's very easy to do. If we go to our Create option here in the Hierarchy panel, we can go to Effects and Particle System. You can also go up to Game Object, Effects, Particle System. Now it's going to create it in our scene, and you'll see that by default it creates this behavior that allows these particles to move up into the air, kind of as if they were floating, like bubbles or something like that. And they also have this default material applied to them, which gives us that white hazy dot. So particle systems can be used to create lots of different things. And in this case, we're going to learn how to create a fire. Now, there are lots and lots of different parameters that we can begin to work with in these particle systems. We're going to focus in this course just to talk about the different categories and what entails in there, and then we'll move into actually editing the particle system and how to create something like fire. So the first section that we have here in the particle system, this is your general settings. This is going to control things like the duration of your particle system. It's going to give us specific behaviors on should this particular particle system loop, meaning that once it's reached the end of the duration, should it start over and begin emitting again. We can set things like the overall lifetime of each particle, the speed of the particles. We could even add things like a gravity modifier to change the behavior of each particle that is emitted. Now, beyond the general settings, we do have the emission section, and emission is just basically going to allow us to change the rate or the amount of particles that are emitted from the emitter. Then we have the shape. The shape is going to change the volume in which the particles are emitted from. And so by default, we're using this cone shape. Now we can change it to really any shape that is within this list. Now beyond the shape, we have things like velocity. Velocity is going to push the particles based on the speed. So it's kind of like a modifier, if you will. Now it also receives that velocity data, and so we can do things like changing color over velocity or something like that. We also have the ability to change color over lifetime, and obviously this is just going to change the color, and we can limit that to the lifetime. We could even change it by the speed. We have the ability to modify the size of the particle over lifetime or by speed. We also have the ability to change rotation. So each particle has a rotation amount, and we can modify that by lifetime or over by speed, however we want to do that. Then we can get into things like external forces. So if we have wind in our scene, we can actually say that these particles are affected by that wind. And we have noise. Now noise, what it's going to do is it's going to allow these particles to move within this image that is a noise image. And so just to give you an idea of what that looks like, you can see right here that we have this noise image that is exported as a texture, okay? And so we can modify that noise based on these particular parameters, okay? Now from here we have collision. Obviously that's going to allow us to collide or allow these particles to collide with other objects. We have the same thing for triggers. So remember we had colliders and triggers, and so if these were to trigger something or if there was something to trigger them, we could export that out through script, okay, or have a script call that. We could also have sub-emitters, and sub-emitters is kind of like if you think of a fire, each particle for the flame or the tongue of the fire could have a sub-emitter for a spark or a smoke particle or something like that. Texture sheet animation is really interesting because we can actually create better looking particles with a texture sheet that will animate based on a few parameters. And it will give us a really nice fluid look to our fire. And we're actually going to use that to get the look that we want. You can add lights to each particle, so that way whenever a particle moves through the air, it will emit a light, change the lighting information based on that. So it's a really neat little effect as well. We can add trails to our particles, and we could even add custom data, so through scripts and things like that. And then we have the renderer, and the renderer is basically just going to show or allow us to modify the material that is applied to each particle itself. So that is basically the categories in a nutshell, and you can kind of get an idea of which category you need to go to change a very specific behavior. And so the first thing that we'll do whenever we create a particle system is to try and identify the behavior of the particles and how they move, and then we'll move into how we can create a material for the particles themselves. So let's go ahead and take a look at how we can do that next.